From beautiful East Tennessee in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, you are listening to the Sherry Voluntary Show. Thank you for spending your time with us today. And today on our show, we're going to have two guests, and I'm really excited about this. We have Mr. Michael Maharrey, or Maharrey rather, and he's a husband and father, journalist, and the communications director for the 10th Amendment Center, which you know I love. And he proudly resides in the home of the original Principles of 98, or the original home thereof, and that is Kentucky. He's also an author of 3 books, which are Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path of Liberty, Smashing Myths, Understanding Madison's Notes on Nullification, and Nullification Objections, Dismantling the Opposition. He also has a new ebook out, and all it will cost you is your email address, The Power of No. And that is going to be a really great read as well, I'm sure. And we also have joining us Clay Davis. He's a Kentucky native, a rock and roll enthusiast, which, right on, and the director of community outreach at See You Watching Lexington, and all-around champion of liberty, but more importantly, father to 2 kids that he is raising as a single dad. So welcome to the show, guys. Thank you so much for being on with me.
So it's an honor and privilege.
Great. Hi. Great.
This is weird doing the 2 people thing. So if we step on each other, I might have to nudge them or something.
That's just fine. I know when we did the radio show, there were generally 3 of us, sometimes 2 of us, and even then, with just the 2 of us in the studio looking at each other, we would yell at each other over each other. So, just a brief introduction. Now, you work for the 10th Amendment Center, and we know they're really big on nullification. That is really what they're pushing through the states. And we may talk about that a little bit later on in the show. And if not, I'd love to have you back on to talk about the great work that they're doing, because I really do appreciate the 10th Amendment Center a lot. So if you have any words you'd like to say about, sort of your mission and maybe what you're currently working on there.
Sure. I think a lot of people probably are familiar with it in libertarian circles. Sometimes we get slammed with the statist moniker because we're all about the Constitution. We kind of have a tagline that we use: follow the Constitution, every issue, every time, no exceptions, no excuses. And what I'll say to people who are anarchists and voluntarists and hardcore libertarians is, if we're going to have a government, and we do, then it should at least we should at least make it follow its own rules, right? So that's part of what we do. But our main thrust, like you said, is nullification, and that's using the power of state and local government to push back against the federal government. And the overall concept here is decentralization. I really think that centralization is the greatest threat to liberty. The more you concentrate power in one place, the more dangerous it becomes. If we have power dispersed through states and local governments, then at least we have a little bit more control, and we have the ability to march with our feet. If one place gets particularly onerous, we can always pack up and go to another place. So decentralization, I think, is a key strategy that we can use right now to advance liberty. So that's really what we're doing at the 10th Amendment Center. We use this idea of nullification to essentially make federal laws null, void, or simply ineffective by using state and local power. And really, ultimately, it comes down to individual action. It takes people being willing to do what the federal government says you're not supposed to. So it's kind of I like to call it the Rosa Parks strategy. Just say no.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about that just recently, that everyone, the media, the Rachel Maddows of the world, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, they've really tried to malign, tenthers, they're calling us now, tenthers. And so, but really, nullification is what, the Underground Railroad was doing. They were just saying, we're not going to obey you because you're wrong. All of those, Martin Luther King Jr., any of the people that just said, we're going to do what we got to do because your laws are wrong. That's a great example of people using nullification to do the right thing and to get the laws changed. So I always like to bring that up when people have been misinformed about what nullification is, and it's probably one of our most important the rights that we have. I mean, if you don't have the right to say no, then you're not free. So we should always have the right to say no. I don't know why it's so hard for people to get that, honestly. So, Clay, I guess we could start off here with you. So what brought you to, the liberty movement?
I got started early on in the 90s with my first taste of activism. Worked with a local politician here in Kentucky named Gatewood Galbraith, who was trying to advance decriminalization of marijuana at that time, way before it was as cool as it is now. So that was my first taste of activism, and it was a pretty inspiring thing to be a part of. Gatewood was a character that got to where he was going 5 minutes before the rest of his body did. So Gatewood was a big personality. So I learned a lot about activism from him, but really didn't. I really didn't feel a need to get involved in things until later on in the turn of the millennium. I went on to have a career and raise kids and things like that, and then started kind of noticing the things that were going on. I was a member of the Republican Party, and noticed that the neocons were starting to kind of take charge of things. And as I matured as an adult, the things that I started to believe in didn't necessarily gel with the Republican Party anymore. And I started looking for a home that was a little bit more natural and comfortable for me. So I left the party and started kind of drifting towards libertarianism, mainly because of the philosophy that's behind it and the principles that are involved. It's nice to have some substance behind your political beliefs, which is something that's kind of void in our arena today.
Yeah, I totally understand that, because I, as well, as you know, am a recovering Republican. So, thankfully, it's, once you get rid of that, you're not one for life. So I've definitely moved on from there. And just, I think that's what it's so clear is that, many people, when they start actually looking for freedom, they find it. Like, it's easy to find. It's just you've got to stop looking at the parties and the state for solutions and start really looking at, well, why do they tell me, why do they have the authority to tell me what to do, and questioning things, and you'll come to some really interesting conclusions you never would have dreamed you would have before. So, and Mike, how about for you? What brought you into the liberty movement and got you active?
Well, oddly enough, it was the 10th Amendment thing. When I first got involved, which was, I kind of got caught up in the Tea Party hoopla. So I came from the right as well. I probably would have been termed religious right. So I was one of those obnoxious ones. But I always had this intuitive sense that government was supposed to be limited. Now, we can argue about whether that's possible or not, but that was my conception. And so when I started getting involved with the Tea Party thing, and really it was, like a lot of people, it was kind of a backlash against the Obama administration. But I knew that the 10th Amendment had something to do with limiting government, and I wanted to get involved. I have a journalism background, so I wanted some place where I could write. And did some research and found the 10th Amendment Center and said, oh, these guys look cool. I had no idea what I was getting into. In fact, I'll tell a real quick funny story.
Sure.
When I first got involved with the 10th Amendment, I was still pretty much in my neocon phase, and especially the last thing to go was the war stuff. And one of the first people that I ever met in the liberty movement was Scott Horton.
Oh.
Anybody that's ever met Scott Horton knows he's one of the most intense human beings you will ever meet.
Yeah.
And I remember we were going somewhere in Austin. I was down there for an event, and he was going off about, I don't even remember what it was. And I'm thinking, what in the world have I gotten myself into? But, being involved with the 10th Amendment Center, I very quickly learned that the Republican Party has nothing to do with limiting government. And began to learn the actual history of the founding and what the Constitution was supposed to mean, the power of nullification, and that got me involved in activism. And through that, I got to know some people that had real strong influence on me. Michael Bolton, who's the executive director, and then Tom Woods. I got to know Tom pretty well, and just being immersed in that, you start reading, and then you fall down the wormhole, and then next thing you know, you're an anarchist. Get rid of the whole government.
I know.
So, that's my story.
Yeah, you wake up, stop coercing me, stop forcing me. Yeah, I felt the same way. Like it just, I had this moment where it really was like a religious experience almost, where I felt it in my brain, like it just clicked that, wow, we really, don't have the right to tell anybody what to do as long as they're not harming people. Like it just, like anything. And I think I had sort of been stepping up to that, but once it just fell into place, it was like, whoa, it took me a minute to I just stood there. It was like a little bit flabbergasted. So it still kind of makes the hair stand up on my arm, because it really did change my life, and for the better, because, well, I say for the better. Sometimes I go, well, some days I wish I could go back, but there's no going back. Like once you see, there's no way you can go back. This isn't the Matrix. I can't take the pill and get the steak or whatever and go back to it. So if only some days. But, I wouldn't want to. I want to, have that awareness of what's morally right. It's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just that it's what I think, in my opinion, it's that it's morally right, that I as a person don't have the right to control you as a person, and especially the state, which is far removed from individuals, doesn't have the right to control people. So it's a good thing.
Amen, sister. Absolutely.
Yeah. So now you guys, moving on to a little bit of what we are actually here to talk about, you, Mike, had an experience in Lexington that sort of kicked this whole See You Watching Lexington organization off. And why don't you tell us the story of what has happened to you?
All right, I'm going to give you the short version, or not maybe not the short version, but the Reader's Digest condensed version. Yeah. Actually, it was about this time last year that there's a park that's up the street from me. It's a skateboard park, and my wife and I often walk through it. And one day we noticed they were putting up a utility pole near the skateboard. I guess we call it pit.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, cool, they're gonna put up some lights so the kids can skateboard at night. And then a few weeks later, there's no lights. There's an array of surveillance cameras on top of this pole. So we've dubbed it the spy pole. And it really kind of it grabbed my attention, because through the 10th Amendment Center, I've been involved in the surveillance issue for several years. So it's something that I'm pretty savvy on, and it's really been one of my primary policy areas with the 10th Amendment Center. And when I saw the cameras go up, I knew that it was probably just the tip of the iceberg. So I started doing some open records requests, try to find out what's going on. Come to find out that this was a pilot program put together by a council member here in Lexington. We call him Spy Pole Fred. His name's Fred Brown. So Spy Pole Fred decided he wanted to create, better safety in the park, and put up this $30,000 camera boondoggle.
Wow.
But what's really disturbing about it is they put them up, and there were absolutely no policies relating to them. Like, how are we going to share this information? How is it going to be stored? Who has access to it? None of that. They just put the thing up, and now they're flying by the seat of their pants.
There was no community outreach either, even though that was recommended by the Department of Safety here in Lexington before the plan be implemented, that the actual community be a part of it, be made aware. And that was never...
Community involvement? You don't say!
Yeah, it was a boondoggle from the beginning.
Yeah.
And, but like I said, the cameras in the park, that's a little bit disturbing, but I had this intuitive sense that it was probably the tip of the iceberg, because what we're seeing across the country is a proliferation of surveillance equipment that is much more intrusive than a camera even. We've got automatic license plate readers that are feeding into giant databases that can track your location, where you've been, where you're going.
But they're not going to use that against us, though, Mike. Like, why are you so suspicious? You're paranoid. They're not going to use it against us.
I got nothing to hide. You should have nothing to fear. So I did some open records requests to the Lexington Police Department, just trying to find out what type of surveillance equipment they already have and what they're using. And what I found out is they have 29 super secret mobile surveillance cameras.
Right.
Now, the next question is, well, what the hell is a mobile surveillance camera? And my answer to that question is, I don't know, because the Lexington Police Department doesn't want to tell us. This is a giant secret, okay? And so they wouldn't give me the documents. Well, they gave me some documents, but they were all redacted. So I've got a whole bunch of sheets of paper with big black boxes and numbers on it. They said that's all I need to know is how much they cost. I don't need to know what they are.
Wow.
And so I appealed my open records request to the state attorney general, which is the process here in Kentucky. And the attorney general found in our favor. They said, yeah, absolutely, the police need to hand these documents over. So the police department sued me. Actually, the city of Lexington sued me. So we're now involved in an ongoing lawsuit because I asked the wrong question. That's
wow.
That's in.
So
really what this was, and we've seen this across the country too with open records requests. Governments are getting very, very aggressive in trying to suppress open records requests by suing individuals. And what they figure is your average Joe is not going to have the resources to pursue a lawsuit,
right,
to deal with it in court, to get lawyers. They're just going to give up. And I'm sure that's what they thought I was going to do. They didn't really understand who they were dealing with. And I have a lot of contacts, so the ACLU of Kentucky took the case, so I'm being very well represented
yeah.
in this case. So, that's kind of the big ball of wax that it ended up rolling into. We still don't know what these cameras are. But ultimately what we're trying to do, and we're not just, complaining about cameras in the park. We actually have an activism agenda, and that is to have the city pass an ordinance that would require the city government to give approval to any surveillance equipment that's purchased by any city agency. Have to be a public meeting. They'd have to line out how they're going to use the equipment, for what purpose, how the data is going to be handled, shared, and then approved before the police could get it. Now, this isn't going to necessarily stop it, but it will at least create a step. The way it works now is police departments oftentimes get money from the federal government, or they'll get grants, or they'll get private grant money, and they'll just buy this stuff and nobody even knows. So they're using it with no oversight and no transparency. And that's really the first step that we want to address here in Lexington. We want the city council to pass this ordinance, at least create that step. Let us know what's going to be done in the name of protecting us, which is really spying on us.
Yeah.
And so we've had very little luck with the city council. They don't seem to really want to deal with us, other than to see.
And now, I think I read or heard you say somewhere that the attorney general actually told them originally, no, you give them the information, and they're defying the attorney general too, which is, if the attorney general would have sided with them at first, they would have just been saying, well, this is a closed matter. The law has spoken. But this is an instance where, this is the problem with the conflict of interest of the monopoly of force and law that the state has, because, they can either make the law the way they want it, or they can just step around it when they want to, because what are you going to do about it? So they're just so transparent in their absolute not caring about our rights at all. They can sort of talk it. They may pay a little bit of lip service to it, but really when it comes down to how they actually operate, they could care less about what your rights are. The police aren't trained on what your rights are. So it's pretty disgusting, I think. And I'm glad you guys are doing something about it. And, it takes paying attention, and it takes being willing to do something. So I appreciate that.
So here's the irony of it, and I'm sure this isn't lost on a lot of the audience, but, you always hear this little mantra that you are the government.
We the people.
What the hell am I suing myself? I don't want to do that.
Right.
This obviously, it really illuminates the fact that the government is an institution that is separate from the citizen.
Yeah.
And, this really bears that out, that the government has its own agenda. It has its own quest for power, and it will, as you say, make up the rules as it goes along and do whatever it can to get its way.
Yeah.
And, I don't know what Spy Pole Fred, what his connection with the surveillance state is, what he thinks he's accomplishing. Maybe he really does think he's going to protect us. I think part of it is he doesn't like brown people. But,
yeah,
it just really at a very granular micro level demonstrates what exactly government is and how it really relates to us as individuals. And it's not a good thing. And if nothing else, I hope that at least people that are outside of our little circle of liberty movement, people outside looking in, will recognize that. And that's the good thing. I've gotten a lot of that response. People are constantly saying, what? They sued you for what? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it creates that visceral outrage, and I think that's a positive
thing.
So,
absolutely.
If nothing else, if we lose the case and we never get an ordinance passed, I think at least we've called attention to the way government operates in a way that resonates with your average person.
Yeah. I think sometimes, I have a tendency to be nice, and my dear friend Alan Mosley with the Gold Standard podcast, he often tells me that I'm too nice sometimes, and I just need to rip Band-Aids off. But
Alan's surf though, so
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes you just have to piss people off. Like we have to be unapologetically libertarian or unapologetically in favor of personal and individual liberties. Otherwise, what are we doing? Like, if we don't differentiate ourselves from the Republicans and the Democrats, we might as well, if we try to placate them, we might as well just stop and join their parties, because it's done. Once you start placating and giving into them, you're no different. So what's the point in looking for anything else? Because you're just bought into that system. I think if we the people are the state, then we need some counseling, some serious counseling, because we're worse than those cutters and the emo kids. So we really need some help, because it's not working. What we're doing is we're harming ourselves. And then I also, hearing your story, I think about how this is another one of those things where, it's basically stalking. And if we were doing it, it would be called stalking. If I had put up a camera to watch you without your knowledge or permission, it would be stalking. So, but the government does it, and all of a sudden it's magically okay and for our protection. Like, what if I want to protect you? I want to keep you locked in my basement, safe from harm, so that, you can be with me forever and put the lotion in the basket. Like, it's, so why, where do we get this witchcraft? Where do we find that, Clay? Can we buy it, or where do we get that magical witchcraft to make everything okay? I want some of that. Some fairy dust or something.
It's interesting, Sherry. Mike actually made that same connection early on when we started trying to call some attention to this issue. That, if you were walking in the park with your wife trying to enjoy an evening walk together around the walking perimeter there in the park, and there was somebody following you around with a camera every step you went, it kind of creeped you out.
Right.
True. And if anyone else were to do that, certainly it would be an issue that would warrant getting some kind of law enforcement involved. But when law enforcement does it, we're not expected to think that's creepy at all. And essentially, with this flagpole that's been put up in our park, that's essentially what's happening. Anybody that's in that park is being creeped on by our local government at any given point. Another thing that really people need to know about these types of devices, especially fixed cameras, what they generally do is they push crime away and out of sight of these cameras. Criminals aren't stupid. This is how they make their living. They break crimes and they stay outside the law. So when they see a surveillance camera in place, obviously they're going to push their activities beyond the range of that camera. So you're essentially getting a false sense of security. A camera cannot make an arrest. It can't make a stop.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's going to do what the police generally do, which is show up after the fact when the crime has happened and take a report. So the camera's essentially just acting as a witness to a crime. It's not doing anything to prevent a crime whatsoever. And neither will any of the other invasive technologies that will inevitably approach into our community. If we don't get ahead of this, put some measures in place to curtail it.
Yeah. They often implement everything in the, think of the children and the, it's for our own safety kind of under that banner. But really, all of that, laws, everything, they talk about we need laws to protect us. They don't protect us. All they do is make it so that you can go to court and get damages. And, police are generally historians to whatever has happened. So they're not going to save you. They're not mandated to save you. I mean, the Supreme Court has ruled they don't have a constitutional mandate to protect you. So, all these things that so many people say, especially on the right. We hear this a lot on the right about small government and getting back to the Constitution, and it's most of the time a bunch of lip service. Because talk to them about a subject that they don't agree with you on, like marijuana legalization or surveillance, the war on terror, the war on drugs, then freedom goes out the window. So they really do sell their freedom for security in many, many ways. And I think these are the people that we can really focus on to wake up, because their ideology in many ways is very similar to a lot of us that are libertarians or liberty-minded. But, they don't see themselves as rejectors of that freedom on certain issues. And I know many people on the left who will just out and out say, well, no, I don't appreciate the Constitution, or no, I don't think you should have the right to free speech. We have to protect people. People's, feelings are more important. And they're at least a little more honest, I think. They're not entrenched in that sort of speech that makes it sound like they're pro-liberty, but then when it gets down to it, they're really, really just want to use the government as a proxy to force you to do what they want. So do you think that, this type of authoritarianism that is, when I heard your story initially, I thought, well, I wonder if they're really upset because they've got something more nefarious going on, or if it's just because you challenged their authority, which is so often the case. Do you have any idea of why it is that? Is it the challenge itself, or is it that they really don't want you to know what they've got going on?
I'd say it's probably a combination of both of those things. I do definitely think that there's this, how dare you, citizen, and the way that they filed the lawsuit, it was clearly a bullying tactic. It was clearly, we'll just make this guy play, we have the power. In the lawsuit, they actually asked the court to give them their legal fees. They want me to pay their legal fees.
Well,
now, I'm already paying their legal fees as a taxpayer, right?
Right.
But and they're not even allowed to do that under the statute. So it's complete BS. It's all an intimidation factor.
Right.
But I do think that, well, I'm at least suspicious that they're so desperate to hide whatever these cameras are that it makes me think they must be something that if the people knew about it would be very angry and upset, right, and feel like that it was something that they shouldn't be using. So
you don't try very hard to conceal this.
Right. You don't usually hide something. It's like when you're a little kid. You don't usually try to hide something unless you know mommy and daddy are going to get mad at you. So I'm pretty convinced that whatever they're doing, whatever these cameras, whatever their capabilities may be, or however they're implementing them, is in all likelihood a violation of our rights that most people are not going to appreciate. So it'll be interesting to see if we can crack through this nut and find out exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, it seems to me that if the state is willing to spend money on prosecuting you for asking a question, that they're really, really up to no good. Because so often, they put these up without any public comment, without any real oversight. And even though you said it was someone else in the government, another department, told them you guys should have public input on this. They didn't do that because they don't give a crap.
No, they did a council kind of a hearing where the guy that's in the Department of Public Safety did a presentation about this is what we would like to do. We really think that you should get community approval before you do this. Well, they didn't do that at all. And then when they were called on it, they said, oh, well, it's a lot of renters in that area, and they just don't have a neighborhood association, and there was no way for us to really get the word out. Well, crap, they sure as hell got the word out when they're running for office.
Yeah. Or when their tax bill is due, they know where to find you.
Yeah, they know exactly where to find you for that. So, so it's a bunch of bovine scats. My friend Tom Arnold sponsored.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Tom. He was our state coordinator down here in Tennessee. He's a Liberty Claus there. Great guy.
He is.
Yeah,
I'm trying to challenge him on that.
Yeah, I know you're getting there. I mean, he's got a pretty magnificent beard, so it might take a little bit. But yeah, it seems to be there's this idea that, like when you look at, say, civil asset forfeiture, which is really sort of one of my pet peeves about the government, because it's outright friggin' theft. I mean, these people are pirates. They call them road pirates. There's a reason, because they are taking their morality and saying, well, I can set it aside because, the state told me that I'm special and I get to rob people for them and I get a little bonus for that. But you see this kind of collusion with the federal government in the equitable sharing program, where a lot of the states said, well, we don't like civil asset forfeiture, so we're going to really curtail that. So the federal government said, hey, just send it to us and we'll take a cut and send it back to you. Which, if we did it again, isn't that like money laundering or something? That would be illegal for us to do.
Right.
But for them...
That's a big issue with the 10th Amendment Center. And I actually just we just published an article. I think it either published last night or today. So it's on the front page of the blog. If you go to blog/10thamendmentcenter.com or blog.10thamendmentcenter.com, you'll find that there. And it actually, the ACLU got information out of Missouri. And Missouri has some of the most strict asset forfeiture laws in the country in terms of they require a conviction, and all asset forfeiture money that's collected by the state goes into the state education fund. Mm-hmm. Well, in 2016, these aren't the exact numbers, I'm rounding a little bit, but in 2015, they collected about $6 million in asset forfeiture money. Wow. And about $300,000 of that ended up in the school fund. So that's how much. What they're doing is exactly what you say. They take the cases, they pass it off to the federal government. The federal government prosecutes it under federal asset forfeiture laws, which do not require a conviction, and which allows the law enforcement agency then to collect 80% of those proceeds. So they're just bypassing the more strict state laws. Now, there's a simple fix for this, and there was actually a bill introduced in the Missouri legislature this year. Just close the loophole. Tell the state and local law enforcement they're not allowed to pass cases off to the federal government. The state has every power to do that. And in fact, the Institute of Justice recommends that any asset forfeiture reform include provisions to close that loophole. So, this is just a bigger example of the way government manages to violate its own rules. Now, it's different pieces of government, but, the way this country has evolved, it's almost become an amorphous state, federal, local government where they work together so closely that there's very little differentiation. That's part of what we're trying to do at the 10th Amendment Center. We're trying to reinsert those barriers between those various levels of government, so they're not, in cahoots so often to, essentially violate our most basic rights. Right. Yeah.
I often said to people it's not that there's guys in a back room somewhere smoking cigars saying we're going to get, Mike or Sherry or Clay. They're not colluding in that way, in that kind of conspiracy. But what it is the system, the nature of centralized power is such that every organization, every department and within that is vying for the most money and the most gifts and cronies to support them. And so what happens is they all end up working together against our interests. And especially when you have a police force that is so highly indoctrinated to believe that they can, that they negate their own morality and the consequences of decisions by taking orders. That doesn't give you you're still responsible for your decisions. And so if you rob somebody on the side of the road, you are a thief. You're not a public servant, and you're not protecting or serving anyone. And often, this is one of the things that a lot of times the right doesn't as well like to look at, is that these are often more harmful to minorities and the poor than than it is to anybody. So, me, bougie anarchist white lady living in West Knoxville, like, it doesn't affect me. I've never even been pulled over for a ticket. I've never gotten one. And Lord knows I speed. So, it doesn't affect me. Like, the police aren't in my neighborhood. They're not looking generally to see what I'm doing every minute of the day. But you drive a few miles, east of here, and you're going to see police everywhere. You're going to see them stopping people and saying, what are you doing walking down the street? Like, they've done something wrong. So there is a bias to race in a lot of these issues. And I don't know if it's necessarily planned that way, but it certainly works out that way. So I think that's another thing that all of the surveillance has to, because often the argument is, well, black people kill more black people. Like, there's not a race problem in this country because black people are doing it to themselves. I mean, I've heard so many conservatives say this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, if the police were looking at me constantly, I'm sure that, there are plenty of things I do that they could do something about if they wanted to.
Sure.
But they're not looking at us. So I think that's definitely something that has to be addressed in these kinds of issues, because it isn't fair. And I understand why so many minorities feel that way, that they are a target, because they are, in many ways, a target of police. And, if we want actual liberty and freedom and individual rights like we say we do, then I think we have to look at that and address it and go, okay, this has been a problem, so let's stop it. I just don't see how we can continue on as if there's no race element at all. Now, it might not be what the left says it is, but it's certainly not what the right says it is either. So how do you sort of bring people to these understandings? Like, I don't know, maybe through We See You Watching Lexington, has there been like any community inpouring to your organization? What kind of influence have you had in the communities? Are you seeing, pairing with maybe some minority groups and that have been a subject of this a lot longer probably? And so, what's been your experience with the community, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, to be honest, Lexington's a pretty white bread community.
Sure.
Not that they're not, minority communities in Lexington, but by and large, the relationship between the Lexington police and the community has been pretty positive. And, I'll give the police department the credit where credit's due. They do a pretty decent job of what I guess is called community policing. There have not been a lot of the racial tensions that we've seen in some of the, some of the bigger cities. You go up the road to Louisville, and you'll definitely see much more of an adversarial relationship between minority communities and the police department. So it's it's kind of, it actually makes it more difficult because we can't tap into that this angst. So we've just really been trying to reach out. I think really more than anything, what's been the most effective thing for us messaging is getting sued. I mean, I can't really thank the city enough for suing, because I'm not sure we would have had any attention at all if we hadn't, if there hadn't been a lawsuit brought out. Because, even talking to some of the minority members on the city council, they're like, oh yeah, we don't mind the cameras, it's going to help our community, and they're not seeing the potential for harm that's there.
Yeah, it's oftentimes what we've seen in other instances in other cities is the targeting of minority communities, neighborhoods that have a diverse population. Those are the neighborhoods that these surveillance devices are actually utilized in the most. So it is a potential concern here, especially if the surveillance state perpetuates and grows in our town. As Mike was saying, there's more of an opportunity for those kinds of abuses. If we don't put an ordinance in place ahead of that, that will provide some kind of accountability and oversight to prevent those kinds of things. There's atrocious stories, Sherry, about law enforcement officers who will track and stalk their ex-wives or ex-girlfriends using these devices, or even politicians that are currently in position will use these things against their adversaries or their political opponents. And these are all potential outcomes that could happen here because we know they've happened elsewhere.
Yeah.
So it's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
And it's coming. I mean, if it's not controlled to begin with, there will be abuses.
Right.
We don't necessarily know how they'll manifest themselves, but 100% chance if the Lexington Police Department gets stingrays, license plate readers, drones, Facebook algorithms that can track social media. If that happens, and if there's no oversight, transparency in place, there will be abuses.
Yeah. I think, people often say that, well, absolute power corrupts absolutely, the Lord Acton quote. They usually think about far removed government, the president or a senator. But really, in a community, the police have almost absolute authority because they can kidnap you off the street for carrying some marijuana in your pocket and put you in a rape cage where Lord knows what is happening to you and call you a criminal when you're not violent. That's a lot of intimidation. Like, that's a lot of power to have. And often what you see are just, the more you show submission to them, the less likely they are to do anything to you. But if you show the slightest bit of resistance, or, hey, I have rights, they're going to teach you about your rights. You're going to learn real fast that you have no rights right there in that instant, that all you have is to try on the back end, if you make it out, because many people don't. I think the police have already killed over 400 people this year. That's not just injuries, that's deaths. And even if you said all of those were justified, they were all aggressive, violent people, they're still killing more than any, illegal ever has. People worry about the wrong things. So we really have to worry about this. They're not even really a police force anymore. They're a domestic military unit because they get all of these the equipment and I can't remember what they call it, the surplus or the leftovers from the military. They get that. And then they're also lobbying for that equipment on their own from tax money. So, you see some of these pictures in cities where they're rolling through a neighborhood in a tank. It is virtually a tank. And they are in head to toe. You can't tell them from a military person. So I think we really have to look around the blue crowd. They are my nemesis. I cannot stand that sort of mentality. And just that phrase, back the blue, it means whatever they do, we're going to stand for them, regardless of whether it's right or not. And, people on the right they're supposed to be the ones concerned with ethics and morality, right? Like, so you can't divorce yourself from those ethics and morality just because it's one of your heroes, your so-called heroes. Like, my best friend is a police officer. That is what it is. He's my best friend of 27 years. So, am I happy about that? Not necessarily, but he's a good guy. And, I recognize that not every police officer as a person is a terrible human being. But in that capacity as an officer, you don't have to do the bad things. You just have to stay silent when the bad things happen. And if you can't stand up and say, there are police that are doing things wrong and let's fix this because it damages our credibility and I'm better than that, then you are a part of the problem and you are a bad cop. That's why there are no good cops. That's just my little rant on it. But
I'm right there with you. I'll take a step further. I'm in full support of police having to have some type of liability insurance. I think that's going to curtail a lot of these instances that we're seeing of them overstepping their power. Is at some point the police officers that have a record of doing some of these heinous things that we all see on Facebook every day and they're becoming more and more visible. If these police officers get a record of doing those types of things, then all of a sudden the insurance company is going to declare those officers uninsurable, which makes them unemployable when we get those guys out of it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I've heard recommended that I'm in full support of, and there's a lot of stuff that's talked about, but I think that would be one of the most effective things that I can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can allow doctors to have malpractice insurance, and it's really not unreasonable to expect the same thing of a law.
Yeah. I mean, we
You
know.
know, they say when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
Exactly.
And you put these guys in military uniforms, you deck them out in military gear, you tell them they're in a war. You know, we're in the war on drugs, the war on terror.
Yeah.
You train them in military tactics. Why are we surprised when they act like soldiers?
Right.
I mean, we've literally turned protect and serve into command and control.
Yeah.
And the solution to this, again, I really think that a lot of this goes back to the federal government. And the federal government is funding all of this military surplus equipment. It's funding the surveillance gear. It's encouraging it because it wants foot soldiers in its war on drugs.
Yeah.
And this is what I talk about all the time at the 10th Amendment Center. The federal government depends on state and local governments to do virtually everything that it does. Anytime you ever see a drug raid on the news, if you watch it, there'll be like 2 DEA agents and 47 sheriff's officers and cops. DEA cannot do a drug bust by themselves. They need state and local support. If we start insisting that our state and local police do state and local stuff and quit being foot soldiers for the damn federal government, then we'll start to see some of this go away naturally. We've created an institutional problem. And like you said, it's not that all police officers are bad, but when you put them in that context, you know, it's go team.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a different person when I play hockey because I'm out on the hockey rink and I'm doing hockey stuff, and it's a different world. It's a different environment. It's a different ethic. And that's what we've created with our police department, and it is not healthy for a society. I mean, you know, even if you're not a libertarian, even if you're just your run-of-the-mill Democrat or Republican, it's not healthy to have a military force basically occupying your hometown. And I think this is one of the most crucial things that America needs to address.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, the police have a cultural problem within their ranks.
Absolutely.
I don't know. We can just expect more of the same, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's sort of about standards. Like, if I'm a layman, I don't need to be held to such a high standard as, say, a surgeon. You know, I can take a splinter out of my hand, but I'm not cutting somebody open to, you know, give them a new heart. Right. But if you are a surgeon, you better damn well know what you're doing. And you better do it with professionalism. And everybody would expect that of them. So why does the right think it's okay when police officers, they don't hold them to the standards that they claim to uphold? They make every excuse in the book. Like, it is amazing to see the mental gymnastics that people will go through to make something okay. And I'm sick of it. Like, I am absolutely sick of it. And, you know, you see, like you were saying, this warrior mentality is what we're training, not servant mentality. That would be a totally different type of mentality. And, you know, seeing everyone as a nail, you know, when they're the hammer. They drive around with Punisher logos on their friggin' cars. He was a vigilante. He did things outside the law. Right. If I were a sheriff or someone in power, I would be going, get that off your fucking police car. Like, that is not the attitude you have towards the people you are serving. So they're not serving us. They're not even anywhere close to serving us because they are revenue generators. And any cop that is honest will tell you that is the main part of their job, is to generate revenue, not to protect you and not to keep you safe. It's to keep themselves safe so they can keep generating that revenue. Now I feel my blood pressure has gone. It always does, but it's so true. And you have to look back at the history of this because it didn't, I mean, I'm not that old. I'm 41. So, but the world has changed so much in my lifetime. And, you know, I hear people talk about all the time, well, the world's a different place after 9/11. But it's really not. It's just gotten more exposed and worse. But we had, like, say, COINTELPRO, the operation with the FBI under Hoover, where they were spying. I have a definition of it here. It was from 56 to 71. It was a series of covert and at times illegal projects conducted by the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation aimed at surveying, infiltrating, discrediting, and I cut it off, but it was political parties or political groups. So like the Black Panthers, the KKK, which
anti-war movement.
Yeah, the anti-war movement. Like, so that's part of the problem, and this is what the left does now with like the 10th Amendment Center. They'll lump them in with racists, like the actual KKK, and say we're all the same group. And they know it's not true, but they also know that most people aren't going to take the time to figure it out because they're too afraid of being called a name and labeled something that they find distasteful. And if you're going to be afraid of being called a racist or whatever, then you need to get out of the movement because it's going to happen. A neo-Confederate. I've been called a liberal, a racist, and a neo-Confederate all in the same day. So I feel like that's the triple crown of, freedom thought. But
you're doing it right.
I'm the worst racist in the world because I married a black woman.
Oh. Well, you're oppressing her then.
Just get tickled with that because I've been called a racist too, and I'm like, dude, you just made yourself look like a complete idiot.
Yeah.
But it's funny though. You talk about the left and the 10th Amendment Center. Now all of a sudden, the left is our friends. I mean, we're getting all kinds of support
as a Trump
because they recognize that they can use state and local power to undermine President Trump. Yeah. Now, I guarantee you, when the next lefty gets in office, then all of a sudden we'll be racist again.
Yeah.
And I'll be able to remind them, hey, you were my buddy a couple of years ago.
We're working together.
And then on the flip side of that, I get nasty emails all the time now from Trump saying, well, what are you doing? You're undermining Trump's agenda. Well,
right.
Yeah, because Trump's agenda is unconstitutional. So, I'm going to take that standard and apply it across the board. Yeah. And, people have a real hard time with that. They're more interested in advancing their policy preferences and using the power of government to do that than they are of actually pursuing liberty and limited government.
Right.
And that's on both sides of the political spectrum. They're all a bunch of hypocrites.
Yeah.
Drive me absolutely bonkers. That's what gets my blood pressure.
Right. Yeah. It's that proxy force that I wouldn't go and steal from my neighbor, but if the government does it, then it's okay. So then I will
I'll steal from my neighbor then.
I'm sorry?
I said, I'll sit in Clay to go steal from
right, yeah. It makes it okay then, right? Because you were just telling him to do it. He didn't have to do it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but they have a whole indoctrinated system of people who will absolutely do what they tell them to do because they follow orders. I think that looking back at that history of like saying the Cointrepoint, which led to the church committee hearings where they exposed many things, but one of the things was that the FBI had actually sent death threats to Martin Luther King Jr. To try and keep him from accepting the Peace Prize and just intimidation factors. They wanted to take out their political opponents, and I think it was Hoover that said, we want an FBI agent behind every mailbox. Like they were in those documents, you see them bragging about breaking up people's marriages, that they would do things to undermine the anti-war movement, and like the Black Panthers. I don't agree with them politically as far as the communism and all that, but I certainly understand why they felt the way they did. Sure. And they absolutely had a lot of good points to make, like arming themselves. Why shouldn't they be armed? But the media, along with the state, when a black person arms themselves, it's scary because they're black. They have every right as a human being to protect themselves like we do. What makes them, because they're a political party, dangerous? If your ideas are good, you don't have to force people. And as far as I know, the Black Panthers never had any real power in the country. But I would consider them part of the waking up movement of the country, just to take a look at our own selves and, look at ourselves in the mirror as a country. Like, the state should do that, which it doesn't care. But we, as people, have to look at ourselves and say, am I really about freedom? And, where am I not about freedom? What are my own biases? And maybe look into the points, because there's so much bias and so much that I put up with beforehand, like the draft. That was a big thing for me. I actually remember saying that people who didn't go when they were called to serve, right, that they were traitors. Like, I felt that way. And now when I look back at that, I go, oh my God, I was so crazy.
Yeah.
But I think, we can look around and see, like, I've been a libertarian libertarian. It took me a little bit to realize there was a philosophy that went along with that. But for a real libertarian, I've been an anarchist, let's say, for like 4 years, 3 or 4 years. So it's not been that long. And I think, I talk to a lot of people that are like that, that it really hasn't been that long. So there is movement. A lot of times I think we feel like there's not movement. So what would you guys suggest to people to like get involved and actually, instead of just spinning our wheels, like I feel like a lot of times people, they'll go to a protest or something and hold a sign and, chant something and feel like they're involved and they're making a difference. But to me, that's spinning your wheels. That's making yourself feel like you're doing something, but you're not really doing anything. And I think the intent is to do something, but they just don't know what to do. So do you guys have any tips on what we can actually do to actually help change things?
Mike actually has done a wonderful job. Here's one of our shameless plugs. On the 10th Amendment Center website, Mike's put together what's called the Activism 101 podcast /blog.
Sweet.
And what he's done is he's kind of pretty much followed the steps of our surveillance story from the very opening throes of this campaign. And what he's done is he's put together a comprehensive step-by-step guide of what you can do in your own local community to actually promote whatever activism cause you're behind and whatever side of the aisle you're on. It's not just necessarily a playbook for libertarians.
Right.
This is for anybody who wants to get involved in their local community and work towards making the community better once you've identified something that the government's screwing up. But it's wonderful, and Mike has done a great job on that, and it's basically every little thing that we've done, the successes and the failures. We had early on we put on a rally, we tried to try to get some people to show up and have a body count, a visible body count that could actually demonstrate to the city that people didn't really want surveillance in our town. And we hyped it and tried to get people to show up, and we had a very sparse turnout. But we ended up trying to make it successful. Even with that, we were able to gain a few things out of it. But we also learned from that mistake as well. And Mike does a great job sharing what to glean from your successes as well as your losses as well. But yeah, check that out. It's Activism 101 on the 10th Amendment website.
Yeah, like a playbook.
I think from a broader perspective, local activism, there are millions of opportunities wherever you might live to get involved in some issue in your local community. I guarantee you, just surveillance. Surveillance is an issue in every community. You might not see it, you might not know about it, but all you got to do is dig a little bit and it's there. Mm-hmm. But it's not just that. I mean, there's all kinds of things that the government is doing that suck, that is happening behind closed doors, and it just takes a few people that are willing to shine that spotlight and take a few action steps and get that ball moving. And like I said, even if you don't ever initiate the change that you want, you're still going to expose the corruption and the problems with government. And maybe that'll get people thinking, maybe there's a better way to solve this problem than by force, coercion, and violence. Yeah. And so I really encourage people to get involved at the state and local level. I think people waste way too much time trying to fix things in Washington, D.C. And you mentioned the church committee, and I think it's interesting. It was 1975, I believe. And, at that time, Frank Church said that the surveillance state had the potential for total tyranny. Okay, he said this in 1975, before everybody was on the internet, before we had cell phones, before it was email. If they had that potential for total tyranny then, where are we today, 30, 40 years later? And what has Congress done about it? Absolutely nothing. In fact, they've made the problem worse. Just recently they reauthorized the FISA amendment, even knowing that process had been used for political purposes. Congress isn't going to fix anything. I tell this to people all the time. Washington, D.C. is not going to solve America's problem. Washington, D.C. is America's problem.
Yeah. So
find some places in your state and local government or local issues you can get involved in. And then I would take it a step farther. find something positive to do in your community. Tutor some kids. Start a food bank. Grow a garden. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can do to live free despite what government may be doing around us. And I think sometimes just by creating community, by reaching out to our neighbors, by just living a life that exemplifies what we're about, the ethics and moral standards that we're about, not forcing people. I think if we start to do a little bit more of that, maybe we don't even need to get involved in the political process. I think some people do. It's something that I feel compelled to do, but it's not for everybody. But there are things that you can do in your community to make a difference, to make it a better place, to make it a freer place, to do things that the government is going to try to do if you don't do it.
Yeah.
Above and beyond being a keyboard warrior, that's all fun and games on Facebook. But to actually get something done, you're actually going to have to get out and get in the community. You're going to have to actually go talk to people and engage people that live in your area. You're also going to have to be able to reach out to those people that we've elected into these positions and see if you can get something useful out of them, which is virtually impossible.
Yeah.
And you pick your spots, find that one candidate who you might have an avenue or a little crack of daylight to get something useful out of, and drain every useful drop you can out of them, because I promise you that's all you can get out of that policy.
Yeah.
They're useless.
Yeah. As Michael Bolden says, they're pawns.
Yeah.
So we use them as such.
Yeah, and I was involved in a meet up with some. I think there was a couple of senators and a couple of House of Representatives, state, and they were talking about how they couldn't get the senators to respond to them, the federal senators to respond to them. For years, they couldn't get any response. They were sending letters to specific ones, and they would not write them back or make any appointments. So they are completely divorced from their states in general. They only care about something when it comes down to whether or not they will get reelected. So I think it's an important thing to remember that really our communities are where it starts, and that culture is upstream of politics. So we want to change culture, not politics, because politics will take care of itself as we begin to change people. And, I'm thankful for my teachers and for waking up, so to speak, getting woke. But yeah, so, we have to do that for other people. We can be that influence to other people, and we don't have to be, Tom Woods, who, sometimes I think, if I just was Tom Woods, I could make this person see, but, he can't convince everybody either. We each have people that we can reach. We just have to get out there. And like you said, get into your community, because I think when people start looking at the world and thinking, everything's so bad, and they're getting so afraid, they've been isolated too much and they're watching too much of the nightly news. Get out into your community and see that people aren't as bad as we're led to believe. There's all kind of reasons and incentives for them to divide us, but no incentives for them to leave us alone and let us be who we are. So I would really appreciate you guys coming on today. And is there anything, the 10th Amendment Center, of course, I know you can find your work at MikeMaharrey.com as well, right? Or is it Michael Maharrey?
It's MichaelMaharrey.com.
Okay.
I really encourage people to check out 10thamendmentcenter.com if you're looking for a place to get involved. Outstanding place to plug in. We have a membership program for as little as like $2 a month. You can be a member of the 10th Amendment Center. There's some benefits to being a member, but mostly it just supports our work. And $2 a month. It's what that much coffee at Starbucks.
Right. Yeah.
really hope people will check that out. If you're interested, we mentioned nullification. If you're interested in a little bit more about that, I'll do the shameless plug.
Yeah.
Up here, Our Last Hope gives the full spiel on nullification, explains it, how it works, the philosophy, the constitutional basis for it. Definitely appreciate anybody who wants to do that. Help support my work. And
sure.
I've got kids in college, which
right.
is a dreadful experience with pocketbooks.
Yeah, no
it's
kidding.
It's available on my website, at the 10th Amendment Center website, or on Amazon.
Great, awesome. And then
I'm also had some work published at Mises and Fee. I'm everywhere. I'm trying to infiltrate everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's so great to remind people that.
Then for sure check out our website, SeeYouWatchingLexington.com. even though this is a local campaign, many of the things that we post are certainly appropriate for all the other communities across America. Right. In my humble opinion, I think we've put together, especially on Facebook, we possibly have one of the top 3 surveillance websites out there. It's very concise, and it's got a lot of information outside, not just pertaining to what we're doing locally, but also in a broader scheme of things across the nation and federal trends as well. And so check that out as well.
And on top of that, you can see footage from the spy hole.
Yeah,
right, because they are monitoring it.
Spy hole. Yeah, open records. Learn how to. They're awesome.
Yeah, and I think that it's a good point to make, that to plug in. We know your story now, and if we kind of plug into that, we can hopefully stop that from happening in our local areas, from getting so far. Or if we find out it's gone that far, we will have your work to build on and not be starting from scratch like you guys were. So I think that's a really good point. Well, thank you both very much for being with me. It's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate your time. And I hope that, we just reach people with this conversation, with our messages, and with all the work that you're doing. And I really appreciate that. So have a wonderful day.
We appreciate you too as well. Thank you for taking the time and energy to put together a podcast. And, everybody, every little bit of information out there is reaching new people every day. So we appreciate your work as well.
Yeah, you exemplify what we all stand for, Sherry. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. Well, you guys take care.
Thanks.